So I've seen 46 movies so far this year. By the time this video comes out, it's probably gone up a few, so check the letterbox link down below just so you can keep updated with what I'm watching, but 23 of those were summer releases. So I thought since we're now in September and entering autumn, I'd go through all the summer 2023 films I saw and tier list them. So these will be our films and these are our categories. We got Go to Territory, which is going to be for films that will more than likely be in my top 15 of the year, or at least films that I will be thinking about a lot for the years to come. Then we have Good Ass Movie, which is for films I really liked, loved even, but don't quite make the all-timers list. Then we got Decent Time, which is self-explanatory, just films that I had a good time watching, but that's about it. We got Mid for all the films that are just okay. Then Kinda Stinky for the films that are below average but not offensive. And then we got Stinker for the worst films I saw this summer, which, full disclosure, the ones I have in here actually aren't even awful films, but they are the bottom of what I saw, and I gotta have a bottom tier, so, you know, here we are. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. I'm gonna go in the order I saw these films, so starting with How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is honestly a banger. I saw this at a blind screening and I hadn't heard of it before seeing it, and I just really liked it. It's a super small scale film about environmental activism operating on a pretty minor level, and it just has a bit of everything. There's high tension, decent stakes, good characters, situational comedy, satisfying ending, and beautiful themes of morality and positive anarchy. Not too much to go into. It has a tight script, one of the most concise and efficient scripts of the year, honestly. Brilliant pace and just an overall really solid time, and it's due a rewatch, so I'm throwing it in Good Ass Movie. Go and watch it if you haven't. I have a feeling it's going to be one of the most underrated films of the year, all things considered. Next up is one I think is going to be a bit overrated at the end of the year, but it's Across the Spider-Verse. And don't get me wrong, me saying it's going to be overrated isn't me saying it's bad, because it isn't. For reference, Into the Spider-Verse is one of my favourite movies of all time. I have a Miles Morales Spider-Man tattoo after all, and this movie was one of my most anticipated of the year. That being said, it pretty much met every single expectation I had for it, and even exceeded some of them to a degree, but regardless of that, I think it needs to be noted that this film is a dud if not given proper payoff, because it is just part one to a two-part finale, and that lack of finality is a killer. And I've seen people defend this by saying most second installments in trilogies have this same problem, but I don't think they do. I would happily watch Empire Strikes Back by itself. I would also happily watch The Two Towers by itself, because those films include individual arcs for their characters. Now granted, there is a complete arc for Gwen and kind of an arc for Miles, but not one that's defined enough to be satisfying, and he's our main protagonist. And we have to come to terms with the very real possibility that Beyond the Spider-Verse never comes out. It's already delayed indefinitely, which if it doesn't come out, it means this film will never get a conclusion, so that absolutely hinders it. But the animation is gorgeous. I think they could have played with the styles a bit more in each universe, but otherwise is very gorgeous. I did a whole video on it if you're curious to my full thoughts. I did give it quite a lot of praise, and I'd maintain that praise, and I'll put it right next to How to Blow Up a Pipeline in Good Ass Movie. A significantly lesser film is next with Flamin Hot, and this is one of those corporate ad films that have been so rife this year, you know, with Air, Blackberry, this, Tetris, and I'd say this one is by far the worst. I mean, for a start, it's aged like milk immediately, because the guy it's about admitted that this isn't really how it went down, and it's been a thing forever that this wasn't an actual true story anyway, so the film is kind of evil in that sense. And the film overall is made competently, and there are very okay moments. It even got a chuckle or two from me, but I just forgot about it the instant it was over. The acting is okay, the script is okay despite being based on exaggerated false events, and this will be nobody's favourite movie of the year. It will be in nobody's top 10, 20 of the year, and my opinion of it has only gotten worse over time, so yeah, it's gonna go in stinker. But then we have Transformers Rise of the Beast, which is about what you'd expect. It's a whatever Transformers film that I enjoyed way too much. This film should realistically go in kinda stinky, but this has a gorilla robot called Optimus Primal, and that is some goated tier stuff. Now, I'm not entirely delusional, it's not gonna go that high or anything, but this is some fun. It is true mindless entertainment, and I have a video on this one too if you want to check that out. It's a perfectly average action film, so I'm gonna drop it in mid, but just know if I really did have it my way, it would probably go in goated territory just for Optimus Primal. But it doesn't matter because we come right back with an ungodly banger, Sanctuary. And if this ain't the horniest film of the year so far, it's a movie about an escort who is essentially blackmailing a future CEO and millionaire because she thinks he owes her for his confidence. It's another smaller film with a super tight script, and it's shot entirely in one location with a cast of like 2. It's visually gorgeous, and the performances by Margaret Qualley and Christopher Abbott are sincere and believable, but Margaret especially gives her absolute everything in this, like this was going to be her last role ever. I adore it. I'm going to rewatch it, and I would give anything to be Hal in this movie. It's the first film going into the goated territory tier, and it pains me that it might slip out of my top 10 by the end of the year, so yeah, go and watch it. Unless you're one of those people that thinks sex scenes shouldn't be in movies for some reason, you should probably give this one a pass. Next on the list is Nimona, which is a Netflix animated movie that I did a video on, because though I don't love it in the way that I think most folks do, I think it has a future classic potential aura about it. It has gorgeous animation, a timeless story, brilliant voice cast, ingenious crossover of sci-fi and fantasy, and more than anything, it has franchise potential. I love the world this builds, and the story beats it hits are top tier. If you have kids or know any, chances are they'll like this film, and you'll also have a pretty good time with it too. I don't entirely have too much to say on it that isn't in that video, so yeah, I'm gonna throw it in decent time. Which brings us to Joyride, a film I loved way more than I expected. A road trip movie that isn't really a road trip with 4 friends finding their roots in China. It's a comedy, of course, and what I think is really special is that each of the main 4 bring a different type of comedy to the film, and it all blends together exceptionally well. It's like The Hangover more than anything, and if that sounds like a bit of you, then go for it because it's worth it. I was terrified of this film having Awkwafina in it when I first heard of it, and gladly she isn't. The cast boasts 4 women who are actually able to deliver lines in a convincingly funny way that isn't on the borders of being racially awkward at the least. It's one of the best comedies of the year so far, absolutely the best outright comedy, and for that it's gonna go in good ass movie. Which brings us to one of the worst films I've seen so far this year, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Okay, so I should put it out there already that I'm not a big fan of the other indie films. I like the first one just fine, but it's not really for me. I don't care at all for 2. The Last Crusade is actually heat. I really love that one, and I watch it as a solo movie all the time. And then 4 was fine too. I don't know why it gets so much hate. It's about as good as the other ones. I don't really care. So I'm already going into this knowing it's the 5th installment in a franchise I care very little for, so though I do think the film overall is pretty stinky, my previous relationship with the series isn't doing it any favors. For one, I think it's way too long. I mean, in my screening, there was a couple that literally fell asleep during the 3rd act just because the pacing is so awful, it feels like a 4-hour movie. But aside from the pacing, 2 hours 20 is just too long. I don't love any of the new characters. Mads Mikkelsen's character should have absolutely died in the intro, which in and of itself goes on forever. The de-aged Harrison Ford makes me feel ill, and they should have just got somebody to play young Ford. Alden Ehrenreich did a fine job in Solo, but that's just the industry now, so obsessed with new technology that they don't care how the art actually turns out as long as it's seen as innovative. So my opinion is that the franchise should have ended on 3, and this one is gonna go in the stinker tier. But luckily we jump back up with The Blackening, a new comedy horror film commenting on the tropes of horror and especially its relationship with black characters and the black community. It's super clever, super funny, well acted, and a really enjoyable time. The problem for me is the overall commentary. And look, I'm a huge horror buff, so when you're making a critique on the genre and its tropes, I'm gonna need you to be right, and some of the points they try to make just don't land super well. Maybe some of these critiques would land better with a general audience that doesn't invest so much of their time in the genre, but people who are really into horror probably won't resonate with the critiques as much. For example, the time they get the question of naming a black character that survived their horror film, and they were all super stumped, and I get it, it's the joke of black people dying first, but that hasn't really been a prevalent thing for decades, and we've had some great black survivors like Keith David as Charles in The Thing, or Carla playing Brandy in I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, every protagonist of a Jordan Peele movie, and my personal favourite, Busta Rhymes in Halloween Resurrection. Also, some of the comedy falls a bit flat for me, but overall it is truly a funny little comedy horror that I'd place comfortably in the decent time tier. Also, granted, I'm not the target demographic, so if you are in the target demographic, you'd probably enjoy it more than I did. Which is also true for the next film, Barbie. So yeah, I was one of the people that contributed to this film making like $1 billion, and I guess I'm pretty indifferent on that. I don't think it deserved $1 billion, but I also don't think it didn't. It's a wonderful movie, brilliant cast, great commentary, genuinely hilarious, and though I have slight problems with the film's final conclusion, I cannot pretend like this film wasn't a blast from beginning to end. It's so creative and beautiful, and such a departure from Gerwig's earlier works in terms of scope, ambition, and style, but the themes of femininity and growing your own identity are still very strong here. I was rooting for this film all the way back since it was announced, and I'm glad it came round to meeting a few of my expectations. It wasn't as amazing as I was hoping it would be, and it isn't in my top 10 of the year so far, it's barely in the top 20, which is shocking because I was anticipating this more than nearly every film this year, but it just didn't hit as hard as I needed it to. But that being said, I still think it's a good ass movie. A film that wasn't on my radar though until like the week before I saw it was Talk to Me, and Jesus. I mean, I did a video on this film, and if you've seen it, you know there was nothing but praise from me. It's easily the best horror film of the year in my opinion, and to say a horror film getting a summer release didn't condemn it to hell is very surprising. It's made back like 12 times its budget, and it's deserved. It's a very fresh take on the possession subgenre, and it's a Gen Z commentary that doesn't look down on us. The Filippo brothers coming from YouTube to directing a real indie movie is a beautiful leap, but for that indie film to be this great is an even more beautiful leap. I've talked this movie to death, so I'm gonna leave it at that and just let you know this is goated territory. It's currently my 6th favourite movie of the year and is overtaking Sanctuary for the top spot on this list. Then another sleeper hit with They Clone Tyrone, also another ridiculously original film. The cast of John Boyega, Jamie Foxx and Teyonah Parris all bring it, and Jamie Foxx is one of them actors that you honestly forget how great he is until he's given a good script and he just runs with it, and it hits you again that he's really one of the most underappreciated actors of our time, entertainers in general really. And John Boyega being one of the greatest actors currently working, and he's one of those actors that I'll watch a movie off his presence in it alone. I've been following his career since I was super young, back when Attack the Block came out and it became a classic in the UK. And I'm less familiar with Miss Paris as an actor, but she is blazing a trail lately. Between WandaVision, Candyman, Chirac and this, she's truly setting herself up for greatness. I just hope she doesn't get lost in the MCU machine, especially with the upcoming The Marvels. But the film doesn't waste an ounce of any of their talents, and the overall story is so unique. There is almost nothing like this, especially nothing presented in this way. It's filmed to look grainy and retro. It's very much an ode to the 70s blaxploitation era, and one of those films that came out of nowhere and hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't quite think it's top tier of the year, although I'd understand if it was for someone else, but for now I'm gonna slot it in the good ass movie tier, above Joyride but just under Spider-Verse. But now a film I did expect a good time from, but just nowhere near that good, was Oppenheimer. I mean, it was on my top 10 most anticipated, but my lord doesn't this film go so fucking hard. Every single frame of this film is heat from top to bottom. I think it's in the conversation of Nolan's best work, and given some time, I think it will be considered as such. Cillian Murphy gives easily his best performance as Robert Oppenheimer, and every single performance in this film is everybody's best. Though Downey is tied between this and Zodiac, but goddamn, him as Strauss is one hell of a comeback performance from his last as Doolittle. I got a chill down my spine during every frame of the Casey Affleck scene, but that might just be my natural reaction to seeing Casey Affleck. It was weird seeing Rami Malek be actually good again, and I loved every minute Einstein was on screen. But the truth is, I actually don't want to talk about this film because it warrants a discussion I simply can't give it right now. One day I'll do a video on this because as soon as I left the cinema, I had this feeling I don't have often, which was that I was certain I had just seen one of the best films I had ever seen in my life. It's easily one of the best of the century so far, and yeah, if you couldn't tell already, it's some goated territory material and straight to the top. And next up we have You Hurt My Feelings, which is a film I watched off the strength of the cast alone because Elaine Bennis is one of my all-time crushes and Julia Louis-Dreyfus has aged like absolute wine and her charm has aged just as well. It's a cute little story about marital issues and I guess more so trust issues. The way communication often breaks down as people get more comfortable, they lose sight of what's more important, honesty or your partner's feelings. The film has tremendous empathy for its characters and even the smaller themes of the weight of expectations are done very well. I think the biggest problem this film encounters is that it quite literally is nothing special. And it has no real itching reason to exist. It's a movie your mom watches once, says she really likes it, and then will forget it exists. It's a perfectly average movie, and for that I'm going to drop it in the mid-tier. I watched that in a double feature with our next, which is The Machine, the film partially based on Bert Kreischer's life, and it is honestly better than I thought it'd be. And the action is done surprisingly well, but other than Bert carrying the comedy, it's a weak film. Way better than it has any right to be, but overall is a film I forgot about until it came to do this tier list. And right now I'm trying to think of scenes from the film and I'm struggling. I'm honestly struggling to think of one single line of dialogue. And that to me signifies a kind of stinky movie. So the only reason it isn't lower is that it wasn't insufferable to get through. Which brings us to a much better time overall, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which is a movie I covered in this video, and as you could tell from the title, it was a mixed bag. It's an excellent movie for kids and the animation is absolutely gorgeous, probably the best to replicate the sort of Spider-Verse style, but to me I think it just slightly fails as a TMNT movie. My biggest complaint is that none of the turtles feel distinct, they all just seem to blend into one, which the whole idea is that they all have very individual personalities and that's what makes them strong and work as a group. Plus, you know, it's a fun conversation to say which turtle is your favourite, especially when you're a kid, but with this movie, it's kind of hard to say which one's your favourite when they're all exactly the same. But regardless of that, I think the film is pretty good, and I wouldn't mind seeing it again sometime. For that, I'll drop it into decent time. I think if you have children or something, this is a perfect movie to sit and watch with them. If you're looking for some real good TMNT content though, you might be slightly disappointed, but whatever, who cares. It's a decent time and in my opinion just slightly better than Nimona. Next we got Asteroid City, the newest Wes Anderson flick, and all things considered, I'm a pretty decent fan of his work. I mean, Rushmore being my favourite of his work, but Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Royal Tenenbaums, and of course the Grand Budapest Hotel are all brilliant, but having to follow his last work, The French Dispatch, Anderson had a lot of expectations to fill, and did he fill them? Well, no, but that's okay. The French Dispatch is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of film, not just for us as an audience, but for a filmmaker to craft. So trying to level up from that isn't something to really aspire for, but rather just go ahead and make something you want to make, which I believe he did. I heard a lot of people saying this was his most experimental film to date or his least whimsical film to date, and I just don't see that at all, being honest. It actually feels very straightforward as far as Anderson goes. The comedy is about the same, the pacing is about the same, the directing style is on autopilot at this point for the guy, and I think he just nails his aesthetic and style like he's been doing it his whole life. I loved it, and it's one of my favourite films from the man. I'm so glad he and Jeffrey Wright found each other because they're just made for each other. The entire cast is stacked from head to toe, probably the best cast of the year, and yeah, it's not the classic everybody wanted it to be, but it's still a good ass movie in my opinion. Then we have Haunted Mansion, which is a remake of that one Eddie Murphy Disney film everybody started to pretend they love when this one came out. And I know you guys are lying because I had literally never heard a single one of you freaks talk about it until this remake came out. And you know what? I'm gonna say it, the remake is better. This movie is far better than the original film. It actually has like a real mystery, and the mansion feels much more rich with history and life. The villain is actually intimidating and scary as opposed to the goddamn butler. I like the new characters, the child actors are better, there's some actual good moments of emotional importance, the general cast is much better. I mean, yeah, they had Eddie Murphy, but come on man, this has Danny DeVito, Rosario Dawson, Owen Wilson, and goddamn Lakeith Stanfield. Stanfield is actually way better than this movie deserves. He gives this one speech about his wife passing away, and I got lost in it for a moment. I forgot I was watching a dumb, goofy Disney horror film. But yeah, all things considered, this movie is okay. Like, yeah, it's great for what it is, but what it is just a PG horror film for kids. But even then, it has the problem of being too long, which, don't get me wrong, it is efficient with what it gets done. It's only 20 minutes longer than the original and expands the story tenfold, but yeah, it's just too long. Also, I think it's super weird that Disney sent this film out to die. It's literally a Halloween movie that came out in the middle of summer to compete with Oppenheimer and Barbie. And the fact that they did all this to a film that they kicked Guillermo del Toro off is crazy. But yeah, whatever, I'm never gonna see this again, and if you have kids or if you are a kid, this movie is gonna be a decent time, but for me, it's a perfectly mid movie. But luckily we have another spike in quality because I went to go and see Scrapper early and I really wanted to do a video on it, and I will at some point because it's incredible. On my current top 10 of the year so far, I have 3 films from my home of the UK, and Scrapper is my second favourite of those 3 and my third favourite out of everything I've seen. It's a story about a girl growing up on a council estate whose mom passes away. In light of that, her dad, who was never really equipped or ready to be a dad, shows up and decides to get to know his daughter. It's a beautiful little movie about the process of mourning, the idea of parenting, and just generally growing up, not just for a child but also an adult. The film is so lower class England, and if you guys don't know, that is like my cinematic kink. Anything that represents where I came from, like kidulthood, adulthood, Attack the Block, Sket, Bullet Boy, Shank, 4321, Roy Lane, and yes, Scrapper, it's gonna be one of my favourite films. And I'm not gonna get into this too heavy because, as I said, I'm planning on doing a video about it, so I'm just gonna drop it into go-to territory and move on. And I'm going to move on to No Hard Feelings, which is a 2023 boner comedy in the vein of like the Judd Apatow era in the 2000s. Those films haven't aged the best in general, but a few still work like Superbad. But it is very much a bygone era, and to make a film like that in the modern day is a very bold choice, and one that I think pays off quite well. It's pretty funny. Jennifer Lawrence is a welcomed presence on the screen after having so much time away from the limelight. The concept is dumb and fairly original, I guess. I think the age gap is a bit weird, and to be that guy, if the genders were swapped, a lot more people would have a problem with it, but you know, it's whatever, I don't know. But there isn't in general a lot to say about it. It's a boner comedy at the end of the day. They attempt some emotional payoff at the end, and it's whatever, and the concept is barely there. The only thing this film is really attempting is comedy, and for that, it succeeds quite well. This is a movie where Jennifer Lawrence German suplexes a teenager whilst butt-ass naked on a beach at night. So yeah, it's a pretty decent time. Then I watched this German movie called The Dive, which is about, well, you know, a dive. There's 2 sisters who go deep sea diving, but during a rockfall incident, one of them gets caught at the bottom, so the other has to go back and forth from the surface to the bottom, collecting air and trying to get help simultaneously. It's a super tense film that operates on the whole idea of bought time. The characters are just constantly trying to earn their next 5 minutes of life, and the complications they encounter are simple yet detrimental. Like the 3 sisters sister not decompressing when she gets to the top of the water because she doesn't have time, but over time that takes a toll on her and even puts her life at risk. There's also a problem where she can't get into the boot of the car, and that simple problem causes a multitude of potentially fatal consequences. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, and the only real weaknesses the film encounters is that ultimately it's just kind of predictable, and it has some themes and threads that are just a bit too vague. Like, they're clearly trying to do something with the siblings' father, but they never fully pay that off, and also the sisters have this unresolved resentment or tension that never really gets addressed either. So yeah, otherwise, it's a good ass movie. Then the next day I did a double feature which started with Past Lives, a Korean movie I just did a video on, which I'm actually very proud of, so go and check that out. But this film is so incredibly mature with how it handles the concept of love and the complications that come along with it. Like I said in my video, this is not a film about romance, because romance is fantastical, it's optimistic, it's fiction, but love is everything. It's painful, beautiful, layered, and most of all, unpredictable. Nora is a protagonist that is in an impossible position, and one that we know as an audience we don't even have a stance on because everything is just developed so well. And if you don't know, basically Nora moves from Korea as a child, leaving behind a boy that she loves. As she grows older in Canada, she becomes on and off with this boy online, but after cutting contact she moves to this like writer's retreat where she meets a guy, and she moves back to New York, and they, you know, they're in love, they get married, blah blah blah. Cut 12 years, and she reconnects with her original love, and she's stuck debating where her strongest love lies. It's tormenting how wonderful the relationships are and how difficult it is to come to a satisfying decision, and in a year where foreign movies are lacking quite a bit, this one stands very, very tall. So yeah, go to territory. It made me feel stuff. And the other half of that double feature was Cobweb, which I did a video on 2 videos ago, so I really am not going to talk about it much, which is a bit disappointing since it is our last film. But to keep it brief, this is a film that is dark, and I don't mean subject wise, I mean like visually this film is dark. I can't see nothing. It's a bit cliche and has received incredibly mixed reviews, but honestly, you know, jokes aside, I enjoyed it quite a bit. The cast is perfectly placed, the mystery is built quite nicely, the pacing is tight, and in general the whole movie is made with enormous brevity. Anthony Starr definitely should do more horror, and in general I think people hating on this film are being a bit too harsh, and the people calling it a masterpiece are being a bit overzealous. The concept is better than the execution, but overall it's a pretty decent time and a fine way to end the summer and transition into the spooky season. But that's it, every film I watched over the summer, and this is the final tier list look. I honestly would maybe shift around some of these, but I'll keep it at that for now. I may do this for autumn too, depending on what I see and how much I get accomplished in that season, but I am going away for a week soon. Well, this video is coming out during that week, so what I get accomplished overall in the month of September is going to be lower than normal, so we'll see. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed. Drop your rankings of everything you saw below. Let me know what you think of this tier list and video, and whether it's one from the go to territory tier or not. As always, keep watching movies.